When my son and his wife died in that car crash, I thought my heart couldn't break any further. But 3 weeks later, my grandson walked into my house, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I want everything that belonged to my parents, now." He had no idea that the fortune he demanded wasn't even his by blood. Please, before we begin, give this story a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. You know, grief has a strange way of changing the air around you. The house feels heavier, the walls start whispering names you'll never hear again, and every photograph becomes a wound you can't stop touching. For 27 days, I couldn't bring myself to step into my son's room. The smell of his cologne still hung in the air, faint but stubborn, mixed with the scent of the cedarwood dresser he built with his own hands. I thought if I kept the door closed long enough, maybe I could trap his memory inside. And then, one morning, I heard the sound of footsteps on the porch. Confident, impatient, too sharp to be from someone in mourning. It was him, my grandson, Nathan, 24 years old, dressed in designer black, sunglasses still on, though the morning sun barely rose. He didn't hug me. He didn't even say hello. He just said, "Grandma, let's make this quick. The lawyer said you have the documents." I remember my fingers tightening around my teacup. The tremor in my hand wasn't from age that day. It was from rage. "Documents?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. "What documents are you talking about, Nathan?" He sighed, rolling his eyes like I was some senile old fool. "Dad's will, Mom's assets, the insurance payout, all of it. You're the executor, aren't you? So let's just cut to the chase." Just like that. No, "How are you?" No, "Are you okay?" Not even a tear for his parents who had just been buried side by side 3 weeks ago. My son, Daniel, had raised him better than that. Or so I thought. I told him gently, "Your father's affairs are still being sorted out. There's a process and the law takes time." But he cut me off, slamming his hand against the table. "Don't play games with me, Grandma. I know how this works. I'm the only child. Everything they owned is mine." He smiled when he said it. That smile, arrogant, hungry. It chilled me to my bones. That's when I realized grief didn't change Nathan. It revealed him. He started visiting every few days after that, not to check on me, but to demand updates. One time, he brought a friend, some tattooed young man with slick hair who leaned against my kitchen counter like he owned the place. They whispered in the corner, laughing, sipping my coffee like it was a casual meetup. I heard one of them say, "Man, she's loaded. This place alone could go for $1 million." I didn't react. I just smiled, poured them more coffee, and pretended to be deaf. But inside, something dark began to stir, something I hadn't felt in years. You see, I wasn't always the quiet old woman people take me for. In my youth, I ran a small business from scratch, fought my way through debt, and outsmarted men who tried to cheat me. My son inherited my resilience, but Nathan, he didn't inherit anything except entitlement. A week later, he came again, this time with papers. "Grandma, it'll be easier if you just sign the property over now. That way we avoid all the legal mess later." I took the papers and pretended to read them. "You've thought this through, haven't you?" He smirked. "I'm just being practical. You're not getting any younger. You don't really need all this space, right?" I looked up at him. "And where do you think I should go, Nathan?" He shrugged. "You could move into a retirement place, something smaller. I'll even pay for it." It took everything in me to not laugh or cry. My husband built this house. My son grew up under this roof, and now this boy, this ungrateful vulture, was telling me to pack up my life and leave. I didn't sign. I told him I needed time to think. And when he left, I sat alone in that kitchen for hours, staring at the documents he'd printed. My son's death had made him bold, but his greed made him stupid. He left the legal template open on a flash drive he forgot in my laptop. When I plugged it in, I found emails. Messages between Nathan and his so-called friends. They joked about liquidating assets and getting the old lady out of the way. One message chilled me to my core. She's slow. We'll make her sign. Once I get the money, we're gone. No more pretending. No more pretending. I remember whispering those words out loud. They echoed through the empty house like a curse. That night, I sat in my late husband's study, the same room where we used to plan every family milestone, and I cried. Not for my son. Not even for my daughter-in-law. I cried for the boy I thought was my grandson. Because the truth was, he never was. I remember the day Daniel brought him home. It was raining, one of those nights where thunder feels like God's own anger shaking the earth. Daniel and his wife Marissa came through the door soaked to the bone, holding something bundled in a blue blanket. I thought it was just a visit. I didn't know they were about to change our lives forever. Marissa's face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. Daniel didn't say a word at first, just looked at me the way he used to when he'd done something he wasn't sure I'd forgive him. "Mom," he whispered, "this is Nathan." I pulled the blanket back and saw a baby. Big eyes, not crying, just watching. "Where did you—" I started. But Daniel interrupted. "He's ours now. Don't ask questions, please." Back then, I didn't. I trusted my son. He'd always been a good man. Gentle, responsible, with a moral compass that never seemed to falter. But there was something in the way Marissa avoided my eyes that night. Something trembling just beneath her polite smile. I should have known there was more to the story.
Over the years, I grew to love Nathan like he was my own flesh and blood. I fed him, rocked him to sleep, watched him take his first steps in this very house. But sometimes I'd catch Marissa looking at him with a strange sort of distance, like she was trying to love him, but couldn't quite bridge the gap. I overheard fragments of arguments between them when I babysat. Words like secret adoption, no one can know, and we did the right thing. I stayed silent, because by then Nathan had become mine in every way that mattered. But now, sitting in that dark study years later, staring at those emails, I realized something cruel. They'd protected that secret for his sake, and he'd grown up to use their love as a weapon. So I decided I would use the truth as mine. The next morning, I called my lawyer, an old friend named Edward, who had handled our family affairs for decades. I told him I wanted to revisit my will. He was hesitant, said it wasn't the right time, that emotions were high. I told him, "Edward, I've never been clearer in my life." He came that afternoon. We sat at the same kitchen table where Nathan had slammed his hand a few days ago. I told Edward everything about the adoption, about Nathan's threats, about the emails. He listened quietly, pen tapping against the edge of his notepad. Finally, he said, "Do you have proof of the adoption?" I nodded. "It's in Daniel's safe. I never touched it after he died." That night, I opened the safe for the first time in 10 years. Inside, beneath old insurance documents and tax records, was a single envelope labeled, "For Mom, only if necessary." My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside were 2 papers. One was a birth certificate, Nathan's, except it wasn't his name at birth. It was another child's name entirely, from another mother, another town. The second paper was an adoption agreement signed by Daniel and Marissa. The date? 24 years ago, just before they moved
cities, and told everyone they were expecting. I sat there for a long time, staring at the documents that could shatter Nathan's entire world. But I didn't want to rush. Revenge isn't served hot, it's savored cold. I knew I couldn't just tell him outright. If I did, he'd deny it, twist it, call me senile. No, I had to make him feel the consequences of his greed before he even knew why they were happening. So I started small. When he came the next week demanding updates, I told him I'd been in touch with the estate lawyer and that paperwork was progressing. His eyes lit up like a child's. He said, "Good, about time." He left smug, thinking victory was near. But behind his back, I began shifting every asset into a private trust, one that he couldn't touch without my approval. I had the authority as executor to delay inheritance processing pending verification of heirs. It was the perfect legal trap. I also started reaching out to a few of Daniel's old friends, people who still remember the time before Nathan existed. I asked casual questions, brought up old memories, dropped subtle mentions. Word began spreading. The cracks in Nathan's story were forming without me even lifting a finger. A month passed. Nathan grew restless. He started calling daily, sometimes showing up unannounced. His tone grew sharper, more desperate. "You're dragging this out on purpose," he accused me one evening. "You think you can keep Dad's money forever." I just smiled and said, "Why do you want it so badly, Nathan? Don't you have enough?" He glared. "You don't get it, do you? It's mine. All of it. You've lived your life. It's my turn now." That's when I knew there was no soul to appeal to. Whatever love my son had poured into him had long rotted away. Then, one morning, I got a call from the bank. Nathan had tried to withdraw funds using Daniel's old account information. He forged a signature, badly. The bank froze the account immediately, and the manager called me. When I confronted Nathan about it, he didn't even deny it. He just sneered and said, "You'll be gone anyway. What difference does it make?" He didn't know it yet, but that was the moment he sealed his fate. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain, holding those adoption papers in my lap. My son's handwriting stared back at me. I could almost hear him saying, "Mom, only if necessary." Well, Daniel, I thought, it's necessary now. The next day, I went to Edward again. I told him to prepare a disclosure letter to be sent only when I said so. Then I went to Nathan's workplace, a real estate office where he played the role of a young hotshot, flashing his father's last name for credibility. I met his boss, a sharp woman in her 40s named Lydia, and introduced myself politely. I dropped a few innocent-sounding remarks about Nathan's interesting background, about how proud I was of him considering where he came from. Her smile faltered just slightly. Good. Seeds of doubt planted. Over the next few weeks, I made sure that Nathan's own arrogance would push him closer to the edge. I let him think the inheritance was almost his. I even told him to prepare the house for evaluation. He started hiring appraisers, showing people around like he already owned the place. And all the while, I watched, quietly, patiently. He thought he was building his empire. He didn't realize he was walking straight into a storm I already summoned. The day the first rumor reached Nathan, I was pruning roses in the garden. The red ones had always been my husband's favorite. He used to say they reminded him of passion, of life, of things worth fighting for. Funny how that same color now reminded me of something else entirely. Vengeance. My phone rang. It was him. His voice was strained, higher than usual. "Grandma, what the hell did you tell Lydia?" I wiped the soil from my gloves slowly, savoring the moment. "Oh, why do you ask, dear?" "She's been asking me weird questions," he snapped. "Something about my birth, my records. Did you—" "Grandma?" I interrupted. "If you have nothing to hide, why does it bother you?" The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Then he hung up without another word. Later that evening, I sat on the porch sipping tea, listening to the night insects. That was the first time I truly smiled since Daniel's death. The gears had started to turn, and not even Nathan could stop them now. But I didn't want his downfall to be quick. Oh no. I wanted him to watch as his life unraveled piece by piece, the same way he'd tried to dismantle mine. The next step came courtesy of karma disguised as bureaucracy. The bank's fraud investigation flagged Nathan's forged signature, and his reputation took a hit. Lydia, his boss, confronted him publicly, and he was suspended pending review. He came storming into my house that evening, eyes wild, face flushed with rage. "You did this," he shouted, kicking the chair beside the table. "You told them lies about me." I looked at him calmly. "No lies, Nathan. I simply told the truth. You were the one who lied to your boss, to the bank, to yourself." He leaned closer, his voice low, almost trembling. "You think you can destroy me, old woman? You think you're smarter than me?" I met his gaze. "No, dear. I know I am." He raised his hand. For a second, I thought he might actually hit me, but he stopped himself. Instead, he slammed his fist on the table so hard that the teacup shattered. Then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him so violently that one of the picture frames fell off the wall. The photo inside was of him and Daniel, taken when Nathan was 6. Daniel was holding him up on his shoulders, both laughing, sun in their faces. It broke something in me to look at it, but I didn't pick it up. I left it there, glass and all, a perfect metaphor for what we'd become. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. I expected Nathan to lash out again, but he didn't. Instead, he went silent. And silence, I've learned, is far more dangerous than noise. One morning, I got another call, this time from Edward. "We've got a problem," he said. "What kind?" I asked. "Someone's been trying to access your trust accounts online. Multiple attempts. The system flagged them. You should change your credentials." I smiled faintly. I already know who it is. Nathan had always been clever, but never wise. He underestimated how much of his father's cunning lived in me. I had already switched all access protocols weeks earlier, leaving a digital trail that would lead nowhere except back to him. That night, I waited. I turned off all the lights and sat in the living room, the old clock ticking loudly in the silence. Around midnight, I heard the sound of a key in the front door. Nathan stepped inside quietly, flashlight in hand. He moved like a thief, because that's exactly what he'd become. He didn't notice me at first. I waited until he reached for the drawer in my study, the one that used to hold important documents. Then I spoke. "You're looking in the wrong place." He jumped, dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, its beam slicing through the darkness until it landed on my face. "Jesus, Grandma, you scared me," he hissed. "You shouldn't be here," I said calmly. He straightened up, trying to recover his composure. "I just wanted to check on something. You've been off lately. Off like the way your father was before he caught you stealing from his company account?" His jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I whispered. I know everything now. He froze. His eyes darted to the safe, then back to me. You went through Dad's things? I did, and I found what he never wanted me to use. He stepped forward slowly. What did you find? I didn't answer. I just looked at him. Really looked. The boy I raised was gone. Standing in front of me was a man whose veins pulsed with greed, whose smile was poison, whose blood wasn't even ours. I said softly, "You're not my grandson, Nathan." His face went blank. For a moment, he almost looked human again, confused, fragile. What? I said, "You were adopted. Daniel and Marissa found you through a private agency. You were never their biological child." He laughed. It was short, sharp, disbelieving. "You're lying." I wish I were, but I have the documents, and if you keep pushing me, everyone will see them. His laugh faded. His hands curled into fists. You wouldn't dare. I stood up, slowly, my knees creaking but my spine straight. You've mistaken my silence for weakness your whole life. But I've survived things that would break you in half.
He glared at me, eyes dark. You destroy me, and you destroyed Dad's memory too. I smiled sadly. He destroyed that himself the moment he chose to protect a lie instead of raising a decent man. He stormed out again, but this time I could tell something had shifted in him. Fear. Not guilt, not remorse. Just fear. 2 days later, Lydia called me. "I think you should know," she said. "Nathan came by the office. He was erratic. He told people you're losing your mind, that you're making things up. But then someone mentioned your husband's lawyer, Edward, and his face went pale." I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Edward. "Send the disclosure package," I said. He hesitated. "You're sure?" "Absolutely." Within 24 hours, every person in Nathan's professional and social circle received an anonymous letter. It contained the adoption papers, the proof of fraud, and a brief note. Some inheritances are earned, others are stolen. By the end of that week, Nathan's career was in ashes. His bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. His friends ghosted him, his girlfriend left him, and Lydia terminated him without a second thought. But I wasn't done. He had one last thing left: pride, and I was going to take that too. I invited him over under the guise of talking things through. He arrived looking haggard, unshaven, desperate. "You ruined me," he said the moment he walked in. I poured tea for both of us and sat down. "No, Nathan, you ruined yourself." "Why?" he asked, voice cracking. "Why would you do this to me?" I looked at him, and for a brief moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Because you tried to take what was never yours. Because you spat on the graves of the people who gave you everything. He gripped the table, tears streaming down his face. "They lied to me." "And you lied to yourself," I said coldly. "Now we're even." He left without another word. I thought that might be the end of it, but I was wrong. The real storm hadn't even begun. For a while, I thought silence would follow. That maybe, just maybe, he'd vanish, disappear into whatever hole shame digs for men like him. But evil doesn't fade that easily. It festers, waits, feeds on the scraps of its own bitterness until it's ready to strike again. It was early morning when I noticed it, the faint smell of gasoline near my porch. At first, I thought it was just the gardener's leftover equipment, but as I walked around the side of the house, I found something that made my blood run cold. An empty fuel can, tossed carelessly near the back door.
and a set of footprints in the damp soil leading straight to my window. I didn't call the police right away. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who it was. Nathan had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his friends. And now he wanted someone to blame. Me. That night, I stayed up late again, this time sitting in the dark with my late husband's old revolver in my lap. I hadn't touched it in years. Daniel used to joke that his mother was too gentle to ever use a gun. Maybe once he was right. But grief and betrayal have a way of burning gentleness out of a person. The hours dragged on. 1 a.m., 2:30 a.m. The house groaned under the weight of time. And then just before 3, I heard it, the soft creak of the back door. He was inside. I didn't move first. I listened to his steps, slow, deliberate, searching. The floorboards betrayed him with every creak. When the shadow finally appeared in the doorway, I raised the gun and clicked the safety off. "Stop right there," I said. The flashlight beam froze on me, then dropped to the floor. "Grandma!" His voice cracked, half fear, half disbelief. "I told you," I said calmly, "you shouldn't be here." He raised his hands, taking a step closer. "I didn't come to hurt you. I just wanted to talk." "Talk?" I repeated, "with gasoline cans?" He swallowed hard. That wasn't what it looked like. I was angry. I lost control. "Lost control?" I echoed, lowering the gun slightly. "You've been losing control for months, Nathan. You tried to steal from me. You tried to ruin me. You even tried to destroy this house." He dropped his gaze to the floor, shame flickering briefly across his face. But then, like a mask slipping back on, his tone changed. "You've taken everything from me. Everything." I tilted my head. "Everything that wasn't yours, you mean?" He took another step forward. "I deserve something, Grandma. You think it's fair that you sit on all this money, this property, while I'm out there losing everything?" "You deserve nothing," I said, the words cutting through the dark like a blade. "You were given a life, a home, a family, and you turned it into a battlefield." He clenched his fists, trembling with rage. "You think you're better than me? You think your precious son would have wanted this? My son would have been ashamed of what you've become." He lunged then, not at me, but at the papers on the desk, the adoption documents laid out like bait. He grabbed them, crumpling them in his fist. "You don't get to ruin me with lies." I didn't flinch. "Those aren't lies. Those are your roots. You should have watered them with gratitude, not greed." He ripped the papers, scattering them like confetti. "If I burn this house, no one will ever know." That was the last straw. I fired the gun, not at him, but into the ceiling. The sound was deafening, echoing through the house like thunder. He froze, his eyes wide. "Get out," I said. My voice was shaking now, not from fear, but fury, barely restrained. He stared at me for a long moment, then spat at my feet and stormed out the door. The smell of gasoline lingered long after he was gone. The next morning, I filed a police report. I told them everything: the break-in, the threats, the fire risk. They took my statement seriously, but part of me knew they wouldn't find him. He was too angry, too desperate, too reckless. Days turned into weeks. The house grew quiet again, though the quiet didn't comfort me anymore. It felt like the calm before something worse. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was Lydia again, her voice trembling. "I thought you should know. Nathan came by here today. He was different. He looked broken. He said he had nothing left. He asked me if I thought his parents would forgive him." "Forgiveness," I murmured. "That's something you earn before you die."
not after. She sighed. He didn't seem dangerous anymore. Just lost. Lost. The word stayed with me all day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my rocking chair, watching the shadows stretch and crawl across the room. Around 2 a.m., I heard a car engine outside. Then, silence. I walked to the window and peeked through the curtains. Nathan's car was parked at the end of the driveway. The driver's seat was empty, but the headlights were still on. Something about it felt wrong. I went outside slowly, the cool night air biting against my skin. The closer I got, the more I could see. The door was ajar, the engine still hummed, and there, slumped over the steering wheel, was Nathan. For a second I thought he was asleep, but then I saw the empty pill bottle on the passenger seat. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stood there, the gravel crunching under my feet, the wind whispering through the trees. His phone was still unlocked, lying in his lap. The last thing he'd typed was a message draft, never sent, addressed to me. It said, "I just wanted you to love me like he did." I sat down on the gravel beside the car. For the first time in months, my heart ached in a way that wasn't anger. I reached out and touched his hand, cold, already stiff, and whispered, "I did, Nathan. That's what you never understood." The police came. The sirens painted my house in red and blue light, flashing over the rose garden, the porch, the window where I'd sat waiting for him all those nights. They called it an overdose. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Either way, it was an ending. Or so I thought. A few days later, Edward visited again. He brought with him a small sealed envelope. "This was left in the safe deposit box. Your son must have arranged it." Inside was a single note, written in Daniel's hand. "If the truth ever destroys him, know that we did what we thought was right. Forgive us, Mom." I folded the paper and pressed it to my chest. Tears came quietly this time, not like a storm, but like rain after drought. Slow, inevitable, cleansing. When I went out to the garden later that evening, I saw the sun setting behind the hills, turning everything gold. I thought about Nathan, about Daniel, about Marissa, all gone now, all ghosts in the same memory. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel proud, just hollow. But I knew one thing for certain: some legacies are meant to end, and I had made sure of it. It's strange how quiet a house can be once everyone's gone. The same walls that once echoed with laughter, arguments, footsteps, and life now only answer back with their own emptiness. It's been 2 years since Nathan died. The roses outside still bloom, but I no longer tend to them. I let nature take its course. Some grew wild, twisting into each other like they were trying to fill the space left behind. Others withered completely, too tired to keep fighting. I understand them. The town eventually forgot the scandal. They always do. A few whispers, a few sympathetic nods at the grocery store, then silence. But silence can be louder than pity. I still get the occasional letter. Edward sends updates on estate matters. Lydia writes once a year, always the same few lines. "I hope you're well. I think about him sometimes." I never reply. There's nothing left to say.
People assume I got what I wanted: revenge, justice, closure. But none of those words fit. What I did wasn't justice. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. There's a difference. When I look back, I don't see a monster in the mirror. I see a woman who spent her life holding a family together until she realized the cracks were too deep, and the only way to stop the bleeding was to cauterize the wound completely. It cost me everything, but I knew that was the price. One afternoon, I decided to clean the attic, a place I hadn't touched since Daniel passed. Dust floated in the air like ghosts, settling on boxes filled with forgotten lives, old photographs, report cards, letters. And tucked inside one of those boxes was a small hand-carved toy car. Nathan made it when he was 8. He'd painted it blue, the color already faded to gray. Underneath it, a note in a child's handwriting: "For Grandma, I'll be good forever." I sat on the floor for hours, holding that little car in my palm. It felt so light, too light to carry all the weight of what came after. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went down to the old dock behind the house, the one Daniel built before Nathan was even born. The moonlight danced on the water like silver veins, alive and endless. I took the toy car, the torn adoption papers, and the revolver, the one that once divided mercy from madness, and set them gently on the wood beside me. I whispered, "It's over now." Then, one by one, I let them slip into the dark water. The car sank first, leaving tiny ripples that glimmered and disappeared. The papers followed, curling as they soaked. The gun, when I dropped it, made no sound at all, just a faint bubble rising to the surface before it vanished. The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was peaceful. When I returned to the house, I lit a single candle in the living room. Its flame flickered against the framed photographs, my husband smiling in his uniform, my son holding a newborn baby, and me standing beside them with that same naive hope I once called family. I didn't cry. I just watched until the wax ran thin, until the flame finally died on its own. Now, sometimes, when the wind moves through the garden at night, I swear I can hear a child's laughter, faint, fleeting, somewhere between the rustling leaves. Maybe it's the house remembering what joy used to sound like. Or maybe it's forgiveness, drifting back in whispers. Either way, I no longer fear the quiet. Because I know now, revenge doesn't end with destruction. It ends with acceptance. And sometimes acceptance is the cruelest form of revenge there is. I've lived long enough to see love turn into grief, and grief into resolve. I've buried a son, a grandson, and every illusion I once clung to. But I'm still here. That's the final twist no one saw coming. Not Nathan, not Daniel, not even fate. Just me, an old woman in a silent house, watching the sunset, remembering what it cost to be right. And if I had to do it all again, I think I still would. Because sometimes the only way to save your family is to end it.